Buddhism first came into Oregon, as far as I know, when the Chinese arrived to work on the railway and work in the canning factories along the Columbia River. And they set up little Buddhist temples. Later, in the later 1800s, then the Japanese came in, and they were doing largely farming, from what I understand. Then the first official Buddhist church or community that was organized, that has lasted, was Oregon Buddhist Church, I think it's called. And they were founded in early 1900s. So they have been in existence for well over 100 years. And then in the early 70s, people invited, talked to the Zen Center of Los Angeles, where Mayazumi Roshi was teaching, and Joko Beck came up a number of times to do little workshops or meditation retreats. And as that community grew stronger, they asked Mayazumi Roshi if somebody else would come up and be here more full-time. And he invited Teshin Sanders. And Teshin Sanders came up in the mid to early 1970s and was the official founder of the Zen community of Oregon. They had a house over in the Terwilliger district, and they were actually an incorporated LLC, nonprofit religious organization back in the 70s.
And we moved to Oregon in 1984 for a variety of reasons. One was that there had been quite a bit of turmoil at ZCLA, and the kids were not thriving in the schools in LA. We'd had to move them all to private church-related schools. So we had to bring the whole family together. I had a job at Emmanuel Hospital. Hogen didn't have a job at the time, but he then got a job waitering because he had done that in Portland before when he was in naturopathic school. But we had two different schedules because he worked nights and I worked days. So I would go and pick him up after his work, and we'd see each other for half an hour, and then he would go to sleep, and it would be almost time for me to wake up and go to work. So, and we had, we rented a house, and then we bought a house, and we were really, really busy the first couple of years. And I also felt like I needed to get perspective on this thing called practice, because I'd been immersed in it for 8.5 years living at ZCLA, and then for years before that when we practiced in San Diego. So I didn't sit, I think, for 2 years. Hogen thinks it was like 1.5 years. When I began sitting again, I realized, oh, this is why I sat. But it took me a while to get perspective on it, of not sitting. I think it's very important for people to have a vacation from sitting. Whether it's going home to visit your family, or you get busy at work and you can't sit for a while, and then come back to it. Because you see the benefits again, much more clearly. And I realized, wow, this is really good for my mind and my whole being. And I felt like, I'm not sure I like who I am if I'm not sitting.
So people began sitting in our living room in Lake Oswego on Nowse Road once a week. And we had a very, very small Sangha at that point.
I didn't want to impose what I knew about teaching on them or ritual or anything, but then they asked, well, couldn't we do some chanting? Because they'd had experience with Mayazumi Roshi coming up and Teshin, and they wanted those things. So we began chanting. And then they asked if I could do Dharma talks, so I did that fairly regularly. Then they wanted a retreat, so we did a weekend retreat. Then they asked about having Jukai, taking the precepts, so we did precept study. We had a sewing group for sewing the Roshis. Mayazumi Roshi helped me by telephone in figuring out their Dharma names. And then, this is before the internet, and then he came up and helped us with the Jukai ceremony, which was in our house. People were sleeping on little pallets all around the place. It was a very nice ceremony.
But as our family grew up and the kids moved out, Chozen and I began looking for a place for residential practice. We both felt that people who were engaged in full-time practice had a very different state of mind than people who were living a householder life like we were. I mean, we have the whole thing. Jobs and dogs and children and real estate and all the stuff that people have.
We also realized the value of a community because both Rochester Zen Center and ZCLA were big families, essentially, and supported each other in practice in a beautiful way. There are people who have known from an early age that something wasn't right, that they didn't fit in with the football crowd or completely, or the cheerleading crowd, or there's just that feeling of I'm not quite in the right place. And then they find Zen practice or any spiritual practice and they feel like, okay, now I'm home. So to provide a place for people to honor their spiritual heart and let it unfold is really important. Maybe the most important thing to offer to people. So because we had done years and years of deep sesshin practice, we knew the value of going ever deeper into the nature of your being, and to begin to answer for yourself the questions of life and death. And what is this life about? Where is my place in life? What am I supposed to do? I don't want to end up at the end of life looking back with regret and saying, oh my gosh, it's all over and I didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. And also as people die around you, what happens to them? So those are really important questions you can answer to your own satisfaction through practice, but it really takes days of silence. So we felt like we needed a place where we could do sesshin and where we could offer a community, a residential community.
So sometime around that same era, we found a place out in the country outside of Corbett on Noust Road, and we had the various names: the Larch Mountain Retreat Center, the Larch Mountain Zen Center, the at one point Hogen and Gyokuko of Dharma Rain and Chozen and me had the Zen Education Training Institute.
And gradually a residential community developed. The first people were Mike and Pam Arian, who had come to ZCO, had come to the Dharma Center in Portland, and they had a long background in the Gurdjieff community. So they had lived in a residential Gurdjieff community on the East Coast and then here in Oregon. And they were kind of looking for something more. So when I said, we're thinking of establishing a residential center, but we need people to be there with us, they immediately volunteered. And so they were the anchors that began that whole residential community at Larch Mountain. And then gradually more people came.
We had no ordained people, we had no priests. Chozen had a group she called the Guinea Pigs group. And in the Guinea Pigs group, she was just experimenting. She said, let's experiment. Let's just try different things out and see how it works. And eventually at Larch Mountain, a property across the street came up for sale. It has a gorgeous, magnificent view over the Columbia River Gorge, 30, 50 miles each direction. And we had a very thriving residential community out there. We began getting more and more people. We were beginning to be known in Portland. We were beginning to be known in that area. And so people were gravitating to us. We used to have Sunday morning programs. And in the early days, we were out in the country, so everybody wanted to bring their dogs. So one Sunday, I remember we must have had 20 dogs out there at Larch Mountain, and they were all running through the buildings, and then they got into a big dog fight in the middle of the place. So that was the end of dogs at Larch Mountain and here. So we were really established out there. Things were growing very nicely out there. We probably had a residence, probably 12 people total. And we were renovating a large barn, a large building we called the Silver Barn. It was a sheet metal building, and we were putting a floor in it, and we were putting a new foundation around the outside. And we came home one day and there was a tag on the fence, the entrance gate fence at Larch Mountain saying, call the land use planning people. One of our neighbors had filed a complaint saying, we were using this for unauthorized activity. Well, in those days, I was really naive about how these things worked. And what I thought was, well, you just go out and you just get started, and then once you kind of gotten started, then you figure out how to make it okay. So we started the process of conditional use and land use planning and facilities, and just about that time, the Columbia River Gorge Scenic Area was a federal region which said there is no building in the scenic area. So we were in a bind between, we had the land use planning issues with the county, and we were in the federal preserve, and we had countless meetings and talked to architects and talked to building people and talked to zoning and just had talked to lawyers, and finally we said, this is impossible. This is too tangled. We just can't do this. And everything shut down. So quarterly, we would try to do short retreats. And so we'd load everything up in all our vans, all the cooking, all the food, all the zafu and zabuton, take them out to these retreat places, set them all up, do our retreat, bring them back, and then collapse. And we did that for several years. So there were probably 8 people cooperatively living together, but we didn't do any retreats, we didn't have any formal programs from the outside. And we spent all of our time, or a lot of extra time, looking for a new property.
I felt we needed to be in a rural setting because Larch Mountain had been beautiful and it's so quiet and that helps people's minds settle down. So we looked at motels, we looked at all kinds of rural property, an old Boy Scout camp that had fallen into ruins, a wrestling camp down in Corvallis, and nothing was suitable. So finally I thought, well, maybe I'm just being stubborn and maybe we need a city center. So we looked in the city, we looked at a Safeway, we looked at nursing homes, everything. We couldn't find anything, and then I talked to Ajahn Amaro, who's a Thai forest monk that I met in Dharamsala when we were meeting with the Dalai Lama. And he said, no, you need to go back to your original search. The Buddha was born in a forest, enlightened in a forest, and died, taught in a forest, and died in a forest. And so as soon as we went back with that inspiration again, and we looked again, we couldn't find anything, I kind of gave up, which was, I think, important. It was important for my will to move out of it, because that's happened more than once, when I just give up, and then Hogen doggedly continues.
I was looking on all the real estate websites, and one day I found a place that was way too far out, way too expensive, way too big, but we said, we're kind of desperate enough, we've looked at all these other places, they may as well go out and take a look.
He found this place, he found this school, and the school district needed to sell it. It was empty, the place was leaking like a sieve. And our board president, who happened to be a real estate lawyer, brokered a really good deal. And so it was like 2 arrows meeting in air. The school's need and our need met perfectly. And ever since we offered our first weekend retreat, it's just grown from there. But you're obliged to keep your practice strong and keep your ego out of it. And a good Sangha will help you. If you give permission to the Sangha to tell you when they think you're off base, then that helps you steer. Teachers need feedback. I just can't believe that there are other people who have jobs and families who are interested in dedicating so much time to the practice and coming for deep practice, who are so inspired to come to Sesshin. It's amazing. It's not true in Asia. In Asia, the lay people support the monasteries by giving food or donations. But here, people want to plunge into the practice wholeheartedly. And, we just have an array of fantastic people. Well, I'm definitely carrying out my Zumi Roshi's vow. And I didn't realize the importance of vow until after he died, I saw a videotape with him talking about vow is what persists after you die. And then I suddenly realized it was like that all of us watching this video in this room, we're his vow. We're the embodiment of his vow, and this is how it goes on. And that was very inspiring, and why we began doing retreats on vows and classes on vows. And Maizumi Roshi and Thich Nhat Hanh both agreed that the Sangha is the treasure that will unfold in this era in the West. And I think that's really true. It is unfolding in a beautiful way. And it's, as we said at the temple downtown, it's a home for people where they feel at home, maybe for the first time in their lives. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.